Hey everybody, KWG here. So a lot of people have been struggling with the new urgent quest, the Armada Training the Final Lament. And if you're one of those people, then I hope that this video is going to be able to help you get that S rank that you've been waiting for. As always, if you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Also, if you guys have any additional tips, leave it down in the comments below. Without further ado, let's get into the video. When you begin the urgent quest, once you zone in, you will appear on a ship. This ship is very similar to those of you guys who have completed the Armada of Annihilation urgent quest, but for those of you guys who have not, then don't worry about it. When spawning in, your teams will be divided between the left and right side of the ship. This really doesn't mean much. This basically just alters the starting position and where you will be when you start the urgent. After clearing all the enemies on the left and right side, there will then be another series of enemies followed by a ship. This will persist throughout the entirety of the first part of this urgent quest. To make it easier for you to see, I'm going to freeze frame. During the ship spawning and then the enemy spawning, throughout the entire duration of this first part, at set intervals, you'll begin to see these ships appear from the northern side of the ship. You want to be destroying these as much as possible, as they do attribute to the amount of max score that you are able to get. If you cannot kill them all, then that is definitely okay. You do want to be killing as many as possible though. After the enemy spawn, there will be a series of turrets that spawn along with them. For this first part, you have enough time to be able to kill the enemies before actually getting on the turret, or cannons if you will. After the initial set of enemies are clear, there will be another set of enemies that are going to be spawning on the northern side of the ship. It is my suggestion to you that while there are players who are currently sitting on the turrets, that another series of players will then begin to start clearing out these enemies that are spawning on the northern side of the ship. After all the enemies are clear, additional turrets will then spawn, so all of you guys can then focus on destroying the ship. Destroying the ship is absolutely necessary for S rank. However, you also do want to be destroying the turrets that appear alongside of the ship, as destroying all of them will then allow you to gain bonus points that add towards the total score. Also keep in mind that there is actually only one weak point when it comes to shooting this ship itself. That'll be indicated by where the health bar is, so you don't really have to worry too much. After the first ship is destroyed, you'll then find that there will be enemies spawning where the turrets currently are. After destroying these enemies, not only will these ships that spawn on the northern side come in even more frequent droves, but another ship will then appear over on the right side of the arena that you currently are using. New turrets will spawn, and this time around, you're going to have less time than you did initially to be able to destroy the ship with the turrets that you currently have. My recommendation to you is to get into the habit of having players on these turrets while simultaneously having other players who are not only clearing the enemies that are going to be spawning, but then also the turrets that are then flying in the air, or rather the turrets that are currently on the ship. While the players are currently on the turrets, taking out the turrets that are on the enemy ship as well as the enemy ship itself, there's going to be enemies that are going to be spawning on the left side of your arena. After those enemies are cleared, there's going to be additional enemies that then spawn in the middle. And then after that, another set of additional enemies, this time Minotaurs, are going to be spawning on the right southern side of the arena. Destroying these enemies is incredibly important, as they can destroy the turrets that are currently attacking the enemy ship. So you do want to make sure that the enemies are taken care of. Much like before, once the enemies are taken care of, there will be additional turrets that then spawn. This allows your whole team to be able to finish up the ship if it hasn't already been taken care of. And then once the ship is finally destroyed, much like before, again, enemies will spawn where the turrets currently are located. After eliminating the enemies, you'll then begin to realize that now there will be two ships spawning on both the left and right side of the ship. Before that, there are also going to be the flying enemies that are then coming from the northern side of the ship. So everything is happening all at once. This is where players begin to feel a little bit overwhelmed, as there is a lot happening all at once. The biggest priority here is the enemies that are spawning on the northern, left, and right side of your arena. The AIS enemies are incredibly strong and also have the potential of destroying the turrets if they target any players who are currently on them. So making sure that they have aggro on a player who is currently trying to kill them, or just eliminating them as quickly as possible, is definitely key. If you don't already have players on the turrets after destroying the AIS, this is now the perfect time to be able to do so. The only thing to keep in mind currently is that enemies are still spawning, so you won't be able to have every player currently on the turrets. I'd say around this time, having 2 players per side is definitely a good way to start, unless you're in a pre-made group, in which case then you can have one team dedicated to what's going to be happening next as enemies are spawning, while you have one then dedicated team per side. So while you have players who are both on the left and right hand side of the arena taking care of the turrets and the ships, another set of players are going to be dealing with now enemies that are going to be spawning on the southern side of the left and right hand side of the ship, as well as the middle of the arena that you're currently using. The suiciding enemies that are both spawning on the southern side of the ship ship are the absolute most important things, as they can destroy the turrets that the players are currently using. And as I said before, destroying the ships is absolutely necessary towards gaining S rank. The enemy that spawns in the middle of the arena is incredibly easy to deal with, unless of course you're me, in which case that enemy will then use its ass to be able to ground pound you several different times. And of course, again, after all the enemies are taken care of, additional turrets will then spawn on the left and right hand side. Hopefully by this time your team will have already taken care of these ships, but if not, this is the perfect time to be able to go and assist them. And then from here, you finally reach the end of the first part of the urgent quest. The only thing you're going to have to do here is basically eliminate every enemy that's currently spawning on your arena. And when you're done, you're going to be transported into the second part. Feel free to go ahead and use as many AoE abilities as well as abilities that cause status ailments during this time, as well as using any active cooldowns. For example, for those of you guys who are playing Luster, this is also a good time to be able to use Luster time. There are a lot of enemies and a lot of bosses, and the faster you get through this, the better. As for my understanding, you don't want to die too many times, as it does then begin to dock points from your total score. Area 2 is a lot easier than the first, except for the final encounter. Area 2 begins with a series of enemies that'll spawn almost immediately in front of you. Your entire objective here is to, well, kill them. Using whatever AoE abilities, status ailment abilities, and so on and so forth, kill them as quickly as possible to be able to open the door in front of you. From here, teams will now split into two, with there being a upward path and a downward path to be able to take. The upper path requires a little bit more finesse, as it does have laser traps to be able to dodge, as well as enemies to be able to clear as well. Your objective on both sides is to basically clear all the enemies and move on into the next room. Something to keep in mind is that if you don't want to dodge the laser beams that are constantly moving on the upper floor, you can take the downward path to be able to mitigate that. The only thing is that you won't be able to go too high, as going too high, then, well, you hit lasers. Well, the damage from all the lasers is negligible at best. Taking too much damage from them is still a problem. Also, in the event that one side is much faster than the other, then you do have jump pads to be able to then take you to the other side. So if you are done with your side a little bit sooner, be able to make sure that you do go to the other one to be able to help your teammates. Also, there is a third platform that'll lead you down to an Ultra Vol Dragon. Once you descend, not only will you have the opportunity to kill the Ultra Vol Dragon, which is incredibly important for the amount of points that you're going to be getting, but there is also a jump pad that'll lead you up to where the turrets reside, that'll then allow you to do two things. One, help the top path with clearing out their enemies, as the turrets are hostile and do deal damage. And two, these turrets do attribute to your maximum point score. Once both sides are complete, the door will then open and will lead you into the next area. In this next room, your team will be met with a series of enemies. After clearing these enemies, you'll then find out that the right side of the room is now open. This is the opportunity in which your team will then split off into two again. The team that now goes into the right side will then have to hit a series of switches. Consider this basically a jumping puzzle, as going to the lasers, you will take a lot of damage. After all the switches are hit, the next area will then open for this side. Before you can continue, you want to be able to make sure that you take care of these enemies, as the next series of switches that you need to hit are currently locked behind a barrier that will only be lifted once these enemies are killed. While on the right side and taking care of these enemies, there's one thing to keep in mind as well. Spawning from the northern side of the room, there will be three large golden ships that'll then appear from a hole. For some reason, can't say that without laughing. From a hole in the wall in the northern side of the area. You want to be able to make sure that you kill these three golden ships, as they do add 94 points each to your total score. After the enemies are taken care of, your next series of objectives revolve around a series of switches. While dodging the laser grid walls, after hitting all of these switches, the final area will then be open to you. This final area then leads you back to the rest of your team, who will also be dealing with a series of enemies. Clear out the enemies that are currently in front of you and then rejoin your team. The team that didn't go to the right side will then continue to press forward. Pretty much during this side, the only thing you're going to be worried about is the waves of enemies that are going to be taking turns dying in front of you. After the initial wave of enemies are taken care of, this side will then be met with two boss type enemies. The enemies that can spawn here do change, while the only constant being the Granog Wanada. Did I say that right? I think I did. It's around this time that both teams will meet back up and defeat these bosses. Once those two boss type enemies are taken care of, you'll be met with a door that'll then lead you into the final room that'll have two more boss type enemies waiting for you. In this room, you'll be met with Foldress and Exegol, two Lumen Mech type enemies that are incredibly strong. Not only that, but on the northern side of the room, you'll also be met with a series of turrets. To make the room a little bit easier, please destroy the turrets first. Once Exegol and Foldress spawn, you will have 1 minute and 15 seconds to be able to kill both of them. From here, it is a complete DPS race. So try to deal out as much damage as you possibly can to be able to kill both of these enemies in time. Of the two enemies, Foldress is definitely the easiest to kill, but Exegol is definitely the tankiest. So it is suggested that you have more players trying to take down Exegol than you do Foldress. With Exegol dealing pretty much arena-wide attacks, you'll find that this might be one of the only areas in which you may find a lot of players dying more often than normal. Making sure that you kill both of these enemies is absolutely paramount to obtaining S rank. Once both enemies are dead, you have pretty much completed the entirety of Area 2. All that's left for you to do is to take a little bit of a breather, because now you're going to be taking on Mitra, Varuna, and Shiva. Once players spawn into Area 3, you'll be met with a portal. After you activate the portal, there'll be a little bit of a countdown sequence, and then the teams will then split yet again. This time, the teams will be split at random, with 4 players then being teleported to Mitra, Varuna, and Shiva each. The players that are dealing with Mitra and Varuna are pretty much fighting a harder version of their story mode and divide quest fights. So if there are attacks that you're not familiar with, that's totally okay. During this time, try to dodge as many mechanics as possible while also taking the least amount of damage. I mean, that's basically the entirety of the game, I guess, right? For the Mitra fight, you want to be able to make sure that you're dealing as much damage as you possibly can from the front, as the chair that she's currently using does mitigate a ton of damage. She does have a shield, but even with that shield destroyed after X amount of damage, the chair still continues to block up to 90% of the damage that you deal. Either side that's done first, either the Mitra or the Varuna side, has 2 jump pads that'll then spawn, allowing you to then go to the next boss that is currently active. Considering you do want to be able to clear this as fast as possible, it is recommended that after completing your respective boss, you go straight to Shiva. However, you can use a jump pad to be able to go and help the other team to be able to clear their boss. My personal opinion is if the team that's dealing with Mitra isn't already done, go and help them, and then vice versa, as having as many players as you possibly can to be able to take down Shiva is definitely really recommended. Now, the Shiva fight is where a majority of players will find their ways dying, as Shiva does have plenty of one-shot mechanics. While Shiva herself isn't exactly an incredibly mobile boss, she does do a lot of attacks and they do come at you incredibly quickly. The majority of them are AoE, so you can definitely either go outside of their range or you can use them, like let's say if you're playing Luster, you can then use them to be able to proc counters. When fighting Shiva, however, there is one attack that is absolutely mandatory that you do not attack her. Shiva has a counter ability, and basically what it does is it locks you in place and then immediately kills you outright. I mean, maybe not immediately, but she then does the counter ability that then kills you outright. There are actually a couple of indicators to be able to tell that she's going to be using this attack and when to stop hitting her. The first indicator is when you hear the following voice line.
This is hardly worth my time.
Once you hear Shiva say, "This is hardly worth my time," you definitely need to stop attacking her. Even if you stop attacking her, if somebody else is attacking her, there's a chance that you might be able to get targeted by her counter ability. The visual indicator of this counter ability is Shiva will in fact stop moving. And unlike all of the other red auras that come from Shiva herself, there is a much lighter red aura that then begins to emit from her feet moving outward. This counter ability is in fact one of the major death dealers in this entire boss fight. So while it might take some time for you to get used to it and look for these indicators, especially visually and audio, it's okay, you'll be able to get it eventually. Once you and all the other players around you start to get used to this, especially once we start getting the Ayer and Klaus series weapons, these boss fights will become a lot easier and you'll probably find a lot less deaths happening. It'll be especially easier to stop dying once we start getting more of the Klaus series units, is that especially in terms of health and defense, this will give you a little bit more room to be able to work with. But after that, you're done. You have successfully completed the Armada Training Final Lament. Hopefully by either running it a ton or by using some of the tips you found in this video, or at least just having a better understanding of the fight, you would have ended with getting an S rank. After you get your S rank, make sure you go to the title counter to be able to reap your reward. Getting an S rank on Ultra Hard gives you 20 augment passes, as well as the title, the Fierce Armada Training Dominator. So if it's a title you feel like flaunting, feel free to go ahead and start using it. But anyway, I hope this guide was at least able to help you, give you an idea of what to be expecting, or even maybe some tips on how to actually complete it and get your S rank. Again, as always, if there's any other tips that you kind of want to share, then that would be much appreciated, and leave it in the comment down below. Keep in mind is that in order to gain an actual S rank, you need 9.5k total points out of a grand total of 10,000. So getting that S rank on Ultra Hard is a little bit more difficult than it might seem. So if you didn't get it the first time, or if you still don't have it by the time that you watch this video, take your time, you will get it eventually. But with that, thank you guys again for watching as always, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Stay awesome, stay beautiful. I'll see you guys next time. Peace. I'm out.